Most enforcers throw fists and move on. Chris Simon threw fists until his brain couldn't tell the difference between a hockey game and a war zone. 100+ fights, 1,824 penalty minutes, 1 Stanley Cup. Then bankruptcy, isolation, and a diagnosis that came too late. Stage 3 CTE, confirmed after he was already gone. Dead at 52. This is the story of the fight that never ended. Wawa, Ontario, a small town on the north shore of Lake Superior. No stoplights, more moose than people. Chris Simon grew up here, hunting and fishing in the same wilderness his ancestors had lived in for centuries. His father John is Ojibwe from the Wichemacong First Nation on Manitoulin Island. The values Simon carried onto the ice, bravery, sacrifice, humility, came from that culture first. But the kid who showed up to junior hockey was not humble. He was angry. With the Ottawa 67s, Simon was suspended for a stick-swinging incident before he was old enough to even vote. He was drinking heavily, trashing hotel rooms, and on a path that, by his own words, led to jail or worse. The change had a name. Ted Nolan, also Ojibwe from Garden River First Nation near Sault Ste. Marie. Nolan was coaching the Sioux Greyhounds when Simon got traded there. During that first season in the Sioux, Simon was still out of control, picking up 8 suspensions totaling 34 games, with 2 of those coming from his own team. He understood what Simon was carrying: the isolation of being Indigenous in a white sport, the weight of expectations that don't come with a manual. Nolan dragged him to the arena at 7 a.m. for skating sessions and straight talk about his future. Simon got sober on New Year's Day, 1992. Never touched alcohol again. He later said he wouldn't have made the NHL without quitting. And he did make the NHL. Drafted 25th overall by Philadelphia in 1990, Simon never played a game for the Flyers. He was shipped to the Quebec Nordiques as part of the blockbuster Eric Lindros trade. When Quebec relocated to Denver, Simon went with them. In 1996, he helped the Colorado Avalanche win their first Stanley Cup. But his roster spot came with a condition. Simon was 6'3", 232 pounds. The league saw a body built for one thing. In hockey, the enforcer is the player who fights so the skilled guys don't have to. You drop the gloves, you protect your teammates, you absorb the damage. That's the trade. Ice time and a paycheck in exchange for your fists and whatever they cost you later. Simon accepted that deal. And for a while, he did more than survive it. He thrived. In 1999-2000, playing for the Washington Capitals, he scored 29 goals. Led the team. Even got a third-place Hart Trophy vote, the award for the league's most valuable player. He told Sports Illustrated that scoring was more enjoyable than fighting. For one brief window, Chris Simon was proof that an enforcer could be something else. It didn't last. After he left Washington, his production collapsed. The goals dried up, the role narrowed. By the time he landed with the Islanders, he was what the league had always wanted him to be. A fighter, full stop. He could have walked away, but walking away meant giving up the only life he'd built since Wawa. Jennifer Belak, the wife of another enforcer, once described that trap perfectly.
He's like, I can't stay here unless I fight.
So Chris Simon kept fighting. And the cost of that decision is written in numbers that are hard to ignore. Over 15 NHL seasons, he was involved in more than 100 fights and was suspended 8 separate times for a combined 65 games. He remains the only player in league history to receive 2 suspensions of 25 games or more. The incidents didn't stay consistent. They escalated. In the 2000 playoffs, he cross-checked Pittsburgh's Peter Popovich across the throat and got a 1-game ban. In 2004, he cross-checked Tampa Bay's Ruslan Fedotenko and then jumped on him throwing punches. Each incident was treated as a standalone event, punished, and moved on from. Then came December 15th, 2007, just 9 months after the Holvig slash that had already earned him 25 games. In a home game against Pittsburgh, Simon skated up behind Penguins forward Jarkko Ruutu during a stoppage and stomped on the back of his right leg with his skate blade. The referee saw everything. Match penalty, ejection, and eventually a 30-game suspension, the third longest in modern NHL history. Colin Campbell called it a lack of ability to control his actions, his 8th disciplinary hearing. The league had a word for Chris Simon: repeat offender. But stop here for a second, because here's what nobody in that disciplinary room was asking. What if control wasn't something he still had? Not as an excuse, as a question. Because what we know now changes what every single one of those incidents means. Imagine taking a full-speed hit to the head, not once, but hundreds of times over 2 decades. Not concussions you report, the ones you shake off on the bench because reporting them means losing your job. Every fight, every cheap shot absorbed, every time your head snapped back and you kept skating, that's not toughness. That deposits into an account you don't know you're opening. The disease is called CTE, and the reason it took so long to understand is brutal. You cannot diagnose it while someone is still alive. There's no scan, no blood test, no symptom checklist that confirms it. You only find it after. What it does is quietly catastrophic. It damages the parts of the brain responsible for impulse control, mood regulation, memory, and decision-making. Not all at once, slowly, progressively. The person doesn't feel themselves changing, but everyone around them does. The rage comes from nowhere. The isolation creeps in. The man who used to be patient becomes a stranger. Chris Simon fought professionally for 21 years. More than 100 bouts, thousands of training sessions, collisions, sticks to the head. And the whole time, the league was watching the symptoms and calling them character flaws. He wasn't alone in this. The hockey world already had a warning, and they ignored it. In the summer of 2011, 3 NHL enforcers were lost within 4 months. Derek Bugard, 28 years old, found on May 13th after mixing alcohol with painkillers. Rick Rippon, 27, died on August 15th after more than a decade of battling depression. Wade Belak, 35, found in a Toronto hotel room on August 31st. 3 men whose entire careers were built around absorbing and delivering damage. All gone before the next season started. Bugard's brain was later studied at Boston University. CTE confirmed. Rippon's came back the same way. George Laraque, 12 NHL seasons as one of the most feared heavyweights in the game, said something after Belak's death that no press release ever captured.
Well, it's not something that I'm really proud of, but it was my job, and one of my job was protecting the star players, and to do that, sometimes you have to fight.
He described what the role actually felt like from the inside. The night before a game, the day of, unable to sit through a movie because you're already thinking about who you have to fight when the puck drops. The league heard all of this, read all of this. Back in Wawa, Chris Simon was losing his memory, his hearing, and his connection to everyone who loved him. And the question the NHL never asked publicly, but answered privately, is exactly where this story goes next. On March 18th, 2024, Chris Simon took his own life in Wawa.
Longtime Washington Capitals fans are mourning the death of Chris Simon. He was just 52 years old.
His family released a statement through his former agent that made their position clear. The family strongly believes, and witnessed firsthand, that Chris struggled immensely from CTE, which unfortunately resulted in his death. 13 months later, in April 2025, the confirmation arrived. Simon's family had donated his brain to the Unite Brain Bank at Boston University's CTE Center. Dr. Ann McKee, the leading neuropathologist in the field, delivered the results. Stage 3 of 4 chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Her statement left no room for ambiguity. Mr. Simon had severe CTE pathology in areas of the brain involved with cognition and mood recognition, and it is likely CTE contributed to his memory problems, depression, and apathy. Everything from his final years suddenly had an explanation. His family put it into words that are difficult to read and impossible to forget. Looking back, we now realize that Chris likely started suffering from CTE in his late 20s to early 30s. Our entire family suffered for many years as we saw our son, brother, father, and husband slip away from us, and we couldn't do anything to help him. Before we lost Chris to CTE, he was a very gentle, loving man whose family meant the world to him. And with that, the Holveg slash from 2007 changes meaning entirely. Simon had just taken a check face first into the boards on that play. He was concussed before he ever picked up his stick. He told the league afterward that he didn't remember doing it, that he was completely out of it.
I know I've been known as a team guy, and that's, I just feel bad, really bad for letting the team down.
The NHL called him a repeat offender. His brain was already deteriorating. 21 years of professional hockey and thousands of blows to the head had produced a diagnosis that connected every suspension, every outburst, and every year of deterioration into a single unbroken line. Now, here is where the story turns from tragedy to something harder to forgive. In September 2011, the same summer that Bugard, Rippon, and Belak all passed, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman emailed Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley and Head of Discipline Brendan Shanahan about whether fighting was responsible. Daley wrote back in plain English, "Fighting raises the incidence of head injuries and concussions, which raises the incidence of depression onset, which raises the incidence of personal tragedies." That was the NHL's own second-in-command drawing a direct line from fighting brain injuries to loss of life. In a private email, in 2011. Publicly, the league said something very different. 2 days after Simon passed, Daley was asked at the GM meetings whether the NHL's position on CTE had changed. His response? No. I think the science is still lacking. Bettman added,
on all these matters, we wait to see what the medical experts tell us.
More than 300 former players eventually sued the NHL, alleging the league had failed to warn them about the long-term risks of head trauma. The case settled in November 2018 for $18.9 million, with the NHL admitting no wrongdoing. The NFL, facing the same science, settled its lawsuit for more than $1 billion. A 2023 JAMA study found that NHL enforcers with 50 or more career fights passed on average 10 years earlier than their peers. The NHL released a statement when Chris Simon died. Fierce competitor and teammate. Condolences to his family. That was it. No policy review, no mention of CTE, no acknowledgement whatsoever of what 21 years of fighting on their behalf had cost him. A sentence and a half, and then silence. Here is what that silence is protecting. Roughly 80% of NHL games today are played without a single fight. The enforcer role has quietly vanished. No press conference, no explanation, no word to the men who spent their careers filling it. You only phase something out in silence when you know why it's gone and you don't want to say it out loud. At Boston University's CTE Center, 19 of 20 former NHL players whose brains have been studied tested positive. A 2024 study found CTE risk increased 34% for every additional year of hockey played. As of today, the National Hockey League has never formally acknowledged a connection between playing professional hockey and developing CTE. Gary Bettman still has not. That is not an absence of information. That's a decision. Linda and John Simon watched their son disappear for decades without knowing why. Headaches every day, his hearing gone, pulling away from everyone who loved him, not because he wanted to, but because the disease was taking the parts of him that knew how to stay. 5 children lost their father. His sister Charlie had to authorize the release of a brain study because the league responsible for his sport wouldn't investigate on its own. Ted Nolan called him a heart of gold. Dr. Ann McKee called it stage 3. The league called it condolences. The fights that destroyed Chris Simon's brain happened on television, in packed arenas, in front of people who stood up and cheered every time the gloves hit the ice. We watched. We loved it. The NHL sold it. And Chris Simon paid for it. The question is not whether the NHL knew. The question is whether we get to keep pretending we didn't either. Chris Simon was more than the fights. But the fights are what the league asked for, and the fights are what took him at 52. The question is not whether the NHL knew. The question is how long we're going to pretend they didn't. If this story hits differently, if you think more people need to hear it, there's a super thanks button right below this video. Every contribution goes directly into making the next investigation happen. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe to Skates and Scars, because the next video connects every dot the NHL hopes you never see.